Julie Andrews has always been seen as the picture of grace. Poised, elegant, untouchable. To the world, she was Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. And standing beside her, Dick Van Dyke, her partner in magic, mischief, and melody. Together, they built a dream, a world of wonder. But behind the smiles, something was never quite as it seemed. There was a moment, promise, a decision made between just the two of them. Not even Disney knew, not even their families. For 60 years, they smiled for the cameras and told the world one story. But the real one stayed buried between them. Until now, at 89 years old, Julie Andrews still carries herself with the same quiet elegance that once enchanted the world. Her voice, so instantly recognizable, may now be softer, more measured, but the warmth behind it hasn't changed. And neither has the way people look at her. She is, and perhaps always will be, Mary Poppins. But beyond the umbrellas and lullabies, Julie has lived a life far more complex than most fans realize. For decades, she avoided the spotlight unless it served something greater. A performance, a cause, a legacy. She never chased headlines, never played the Hollywood game. And even now, when so many of her peers have faded from memory or retreated entirely from public life, Julie remains present, selective but present. She appears rarely now, often in tributes, retrospectives, or interviews that feel more like celebrations of a life already cemented in cultural history. And when she speaks, people listen, not for gossip, but for insight, for stories no one else could tell, stories only she lived. But with age has come something else, a kind of reflection she once held back. In recent years, Julie has been more open, not in a scandalous way, never for shock, but with a gentle honesty that comes from having nothing left to prove. She has started to speak about moments she used to protect, people she once shielded, and feelings she never admitted out loud, even to herself. That's what made her recent comments so startling. Because when Julie Andrews finally said what really happened on the set of Mary Poppins, what she and Dick Van Dyke kept between them for 6 decades, it wasn't the kind of story anyone expected. It wasn't scandal. It wasn't drama. It was something deeper. And it began, as most things in her life did, with kindness. When Julie first took the role of Mary Poppins, she was still new to film. A stage actress, known for My Fair Lady but passed over for the film version in favor of Audrey Hepburn. Walt Disney himself had to convince her to say yes. She was pregnant at the time, unsure if she could even take the role. But everything aligned, and history was made. She arrived on set not knowing what to expect. And then, in walked Dick Van Dyke. Their chemistry was immediate, playful, effortless. But more importantly, it was built on trust. A trust that would become central to what they were about to do, not just on screen but behind it. Because while the cameras rolled, something else was happening. Something that would bind Julie and Dick together in a way few people ever knew. Something they both agreed could never be spoken about. At least not then. At 89, Julie doesn't need to perform anymore. She doesn't need to smile through the past or smooth over the rougher edges. She can tell the truth, not because she's bitter, but because she's finally ready. And what she said about Dick, about Mary Poppins, about what they hid for so long, changed everything. It's hard to imagine now, but when Mary Poppins was first being made in the early 1960s, no one, not Walt Disney, not the cast, not even Julie Andrews herself, could have predicted what it would become. Julie was 27 at the time, a rising star on the London stage, known for her crystalline voice and impeccable timing, but still largely unknown to American filmgoers. When Walt Disney saw her in Camelot on Broadway, he was instantly captivated. He didn't just want her for Mary Poppins. He insisted on her, fought for her, waited until she gave birth to her daughter before filming could begin. That kind of confidence from someone like Disney could have been overwhelming. But Julie walked onto the Disney lot with the grace of someone born to it, and almost instantly, she was swept into a world of dancing penguins, flying nannies, and chimney sweeps that would change her life forever. Then came Dick Van Dyke. If Julie was the newcomer, Dick was the wild card. A television comedian with a knack for physical humor and a grin that could melt through any formality, he was cast as Bert, a character invented almost entirely for the film. On paper, their pairing seemed odd. He was loose, unpredictable, famously unschooled in accents. She was proper, trained, exacting. But the moment the two began rehearsing together, something clicked. They weren't just co-stars. They were mirrors, balancing each other out in a way no one could have scripted. And they knew it. They didn't talk about it much. They didn't have to. But from those first days on set, a quiet understanding developed between them. It wasn't romantic, not in the traditional sense. But it was intimate, protective. They became each other's lifeline through a production that, for all its whimsy, carried enormous pressure. Walt Disney was a perfectionist. The crew was pioneering techniques no one had ever attempted. The budget ballooned. And Julie, for all her training, was navigating film for the very first time, often while still adjusting to new motherhood. It was Dick who made her laugh when the wires dug into her ribs. It was Julie who steadied him when critics tore into his now infamous Cockney accent. They weren't just Bert and Mary. They were Julie and Dick, two performers navigating something bigger than themselves, bound by a promise to make it all work. And somewhere in those months, a secret was born. No one noticed it then. Not the choreographers, not the studio executives, not even their fellow cast members. But something passed between Julie and Dick that would become a pact. A decision. They would protect the illusion not just of Mary Poppins but of themselves. Of the version of their bond that the world wanted to see. They never rehearsed the lie. They never spoke it aloud. But they carried it together. And for decades they never broke it. As the years passed and Mary Poppins grew into a generational classic, that secret, whatever it was, remained untouched. Journalists asked. Fans speculated. But Julie and Dick smiled politely and gave nothing away. Because the truth, whatever shape it took, didn't belong to the world. It belonged to them. Until now. To the outside world, Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke were the perfect on-screen pair. Playful, wholesome, effortless. But behind the charm and choreographed smiles was a truth far more delicate and far more human than anything Disney ever put on film. For all the joy Mary Poppins brought to audiences, filming it was not without its stress. Julie, still adjusting to life as a new mother, often arrived on set tired and stretched thin. She was working long hours, learning complex choreography, lip-syncing with animated characters, and doing it all under the watchful eye of Walt Disney himself. The pressure to get it right, to be perfect, was immense. And that's when Dick stepped in. He wasn't just comic relief on camera. He became her emotional anchor off it. He made her laugh when she was too tired to think. He encouraged her when the technical demands of green screens and wirework became overwhelming. And slowly, without ever meaning to, they built something sacred, something private. It wasn't an affair. That's not the secret. But it was something just as intimate. A quiet, unspoken understanding. A closeness that crossed professional lines but not romantic ones. It was the kind of bond that only two people under immense pressure, working inside a fantasy they didn't fully believe in, could understand. They could finish each other's sentences. They knew how to calm each other with a glance. And when the cameras stopped rolling, they often found themselves lingering behind, talking, laughing, letting the weight of the day fall away in each other's presence. But they also knew the rules. Disney expected professionalism. The press expected fairy tales. And fans expected Bert and Mary to remain untouched, perfect, frozen in time. So they made a choice. One that neither of them spoke aloud. They would protect the image. They wouldn't let anyone in. Not directors, not co-stars, not even their own families. Whatever was happening between them, whatever deep emotional bond had formed, it would stay between them. There was even a moment, years later, when Dick was asked in an interview if there had ever been more between him and Julie. He paused, smiled, and simply said, "There were things we never talked about. That's how you keep the magic." Julie never corrected him. She never added or denied. She simply nodded and moved on. Because they had promised each other, without words, to never let the real story interfere with the one they gave the world. The secret wasn't scandal. It was vulnerability. Julie had leaned on Dick in ways few ever knew, and he, in turn, had shielded her, quietly, consistently, from the harsh realities of a business that demanded too much. Their bond was real but invisible, felt but never seen. And now, 6 decades later, Julie has finally admitted it. Not in a dramatic tell-all or splashy headline, but in a quiet moment offhand, almost as if, after 60 years, the weight of protecting it had finally lifted. What they had wasn't meant for the world, but now, the world is finally hearing it. Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke had always insisted there was nothing unusual behind the scenes of Mary Poppins. That what the audience saw on screen, a practically perfect performance wrapped in whimsy and song, was exactly what it had been in real life. But that wasn't true, and it was never meant to be, because behind the charm, behind the pristine performances and carefully rehearsed lines, there was one thing Julie and Dick agreed on early, something that would shape how they handled the press, how they presented their legacy, and how they protected the film from the real story. They would never admit how fragile it all really was. Julie Andrews was terrified, not of the role, she had confidence in her craft, but of what the role meant. This was her first major film. She had just become a mother. The pressure from Disney, the constant comparisons to other stars, the fear that she might not be enough. All of it sat just beneath the surface. And every day, she was told to smile, sing, and sparkle. Dick Van Dyke knew it, and what he did in response was protect her. He kept her laughing, distracted her from the wires and green screens, and made her feel like it was okay to not be perfect. In many ways, Dick became her co-pilot, not just on screen as Bert, but behind the scenes where the real tension lived. But here's the twist. The lie wasn't about an affair. It wasn't about drama. It was about emotion. They lied to preserve the illusion that Mary Poppins had been a dream to make, that everything had come together smoothly, that they were just two happy performers floating through a fantasy world with nothing but joy in their hearts. The truth? Some days were hard. Some scenes took dozens of takes. Julie cried in her trailer more than once. Dick nearly walked off the set over frustrations with his accent and criticism from Disney executives. And in the middle of it all, they leaned on each other hard. But that wasn't the story the world wanted. So they covered it. In every interview for decades, they told the same tale. That everything had been wonderful. That filming was a breeze. That they were best friends, always laughing, never arguing, never worrying. The rehearsed narrative became gospel. And Mary Poppins became more than a film, it became a legend. Julie later admitted that this lie wasn't meant to deceive. It was meant to preserve. If we had told people what it really felt like, the pressure, the fear, she said in a soft voice during a tribute interview, it might have ruined the illusion, and the illusion was too important. She and Dick had agreed, no matter what happened between them personally, no matter how much strain they were under, they would never let the public see behind the curtain. Because for generations of children, Mary Poppins was real. The rooftops of London, the chalk drawings, the talking umbrellas, it was all a kind of magic. And they didn't want to be the ones to break the spell. That was the lie. Not of betrayal, not of scandal, but of silence. The silence of two performers who bore the weight of perfection so others could believe in it. And now, at 89, Julie has finally lifted that curtain. Just enough for us to see what they were really protecting. Not themselves, but the wonder of it all. Julie Andrews has spent most of her life holding things in. Not because she was dishonest, and not because she didn't have anything to say, but because, for someone like Julie, silence was a kind of protection. For the people she loved, for the stories she valued, and for the legacy she helped build, one careful moment at a time. Even now, at 89, when her peers have either vanished from the public eye or spilled their truths in memoirs and tell-alls, Julie remains measured, dignified. There's a kind of nobility in the way she chooses her words, always thoughtful, always cautious, never careless. So why now? Why, after 6 decades, is she finally speaking about what really happened behind the scenes of Mary Poppins? About what she and Dick Van Dyke carried between them, secretly, silently, for so long? The answer isn't scandal. its legacy. Julie Andrews knows what Mary Poppins means to the world. It's not just a film. It's a memory, a childhood, a reminder that magic can live inside the ordinary. She didn't want to taint that. For years, she believed that any truth, even a gentle one, might crack the illusion. That if she opened up about her fears on set, or the emotional dependency she and Dick shared, the world might stop believing in Mary Poppins altogether. And that scared her more than anything, because Mary Poppins wasn't just a role. It was a turning point, a gift. It gave her a global platform. It introduced her to families across generations. And it forged a bond with Dick Van Dyke that would shape both of their careers and lives forever. But it also came with pressure and pain, and expectations so high, she sometimes felt like she couldn't breathe beneath them. And yet she stayed silent, because the truth didn't belong to her alone. It belonged to Dick too, and out of respect for him, for the bond they shared, for the promise they never quite spoke aloud, she kept the story tucked away, even when asked directly, even when tempted to set the record straight. But now things are different. Time has passed. They are older, softer. The world has changed. The magic of Mary Poppins is no longer fragile. It's untouchable. The spell can't be broken now. It's woven into pop culture, into family traditions, into the soundtrack of people's lives. So now she feels safe enough to say it, that it wasn't easy, that she leaned on Dick Van Dyke like no one else, that some days she almost walked away, that the strength you saw in Mary Poppins was borrowed from a place of deep vulnerability. And most of all, that there was a secret, a truth they kept, not to deceive, but to protect. Julie has said that talking about it now isn't about unburdening. It's about honoring what they built, honoring the man who stood beside her through every scene, every storm, every silence, and honoring the version of herself that had to pretend she was okay when inside she was anything but. She doesn't regret the silence. She just knows it's time, because the story isn't about what they hid. It's about why they hid it, and what that reveals about love, loyalty, and the kind of partnership that only happens once in a lifetime. They were never lovers, but they were something more than friends. Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke shared a kind of bond that defied explanation. It wasn't built on flirtation or fame. It was built on something quieter, something deeper, something that lasted. And as the years passed, and the cameras stopped rolling, that bond only grew stronger. They didn't see each other often. Their careers took them in different directions. Life moved on. But whenever they did reunite, at award shows, tributes, or anniversary specials, it was as if no time had passed at all. There was always that look between them, a knowing glance, a smile that said, "We remember," because what they shared on that Mary Poppins set wasn't just chemistry, it was a survival pact, a wordless promise to hold each other up, to never let the cracks show, to protect not only the film, but each other. And in many ways, that promise continued long after the credits rolled. Dick Van Dyke would often be asked about Julie in interviews. He'd grin, eyes sparkling, and say, "Julie? She's my Mary." He never explained what that meant. He didn't need to. Julie, for her part, rarely spoke about the depth of their connection. Until now. In a recent tribute filmed for Dick's 98th birthday, she paused for a moment, looked off camera, and said softly, "There are things I never said, because I didn't need to." He knew. That was the gift. For all the applause and accolades, for all the songs and spotlights, the real gift Julie gave Dick wasn't public praise. It was silence. The kind of respectful, protective silence that says, "I've got you," even when no one else knows. And Dick, he gave her space. Space to be vulnerable when she didn't feel strong. Space to be silly when the pressure was crushing. Space to fall apart quietly without having to explain. They carried each other through that film in ways no one saw. And in the decades that followed, they never let that truth get cheapened by fame or turned into gossip. Until now, when it finally feels safe to say it out loud. Julie has said, in so many words, that the greatest thing about her time on Mary Poppins wasn't the songs or the special effects. It was him. He made her feel seen. He made her feel safe, and he made her believe, at a time when she wasn't sure she could pull it off, that maybe, just maybe, she could be practically perfect. And Dick? He has never stopped saying it. She was the real magic. In the end, the story they kept quiet wasn't about scandal. It was about kindness, and how rare it is to find someone who simply understands. Julie Andrews waited 60 years to reveal the truth. Not because she was ashamed, but because she treasured it. Because the moment they shared, the story they protected, wasn't meant for headlines. It was meant for each other. And now, as one chapter ends and another begins, she's finally let the world in. Not to gossip, not to dramatize, but to honor. Because sometimes the strongest love is the one that never needed to be spoken aloud. For more of the latest news and stories, check out this video.